Hi, I'm Emily. I am here with Miguel. We are organizers with the East Vancouver Workers Assembly. We will be doing our presentation, which we gave at the July Assembly on the 28th. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass it to Miguel to get going.
Okay, so this was a presentation that we presented during our last assembly, and we started off with a couple questions that members just raised their hands to answer it. I'm gonna make these questions anyways, so you can think it through while you watch the video. If you wanna write us through our Instagram or through our email, we have our Instagram on the right there on the screen. Um, yeah, we'll love to read what you have to say. And the first question is if you have ever had an experience where workplace legislation was used to improve your working condition or to protect you as a worker. And the second one is if you think that with the current legislation we're able to defend our interests as workers. So there's a fundamental problem with how legislation is designed. And this problem is that we're all equal under the eyes of the law. And you might think it's strange that I'm pointing that out and think, Miguel, so what do you mean? You mean that we should be unequal? No, I don't think we should be unequal, but we are unequal. There's a really small number of people in Canada that own the means through which we produce our system every day. They own the banks, the factories, the ports, they are our bosses in our own workplace, and they have thousands of employees that have nothing else to sell besides their ability to work. The point is that we are treated as equals so that we remain exploitable. We're treated equally, but only the bosses have the political power and the money that will ultimately determine how things are done in the system, how legislation is designed, how the labor movement is able to fight, how far we can go. Of course, legislation is not all bad. There are laws that try to protect us from out of the normal asshole behavior from our bosses, but those are only breadcrumbs. And although historically it has been improving, it's only ever been because people like us, workers, shed their blood and sweat against the rich to win demands like the 8 hours workdays, for example. But we want more than just breadcrumbs. These demands won over by the workers, by the labor movement, are used today to crush our consciousness by making it appear that there are enough protections in place for us. It will give us enough crumbs so we don't decide to take over the mill, basically. Ultimately, aside from the victories the labor movement has had in the past, legislation restrains workers' ability to fight and challenge the interests of the rich and ruling class. Legislation, all it does nowadays, besides giving us breadcrumbs, it puts workers' organizations on a leash so they don't lose control over us, so they don't lose control of how we're going to fight for our demands. So this isn't going to be a know your workplace rights presentation. We're actually going to use examples from real legislation to show how it prevents us from building power and using it as workers. And we're also going to explore how we can actually fight. So what is the method that we want to use to fight to win these demands? Uh, so in our province, the BC Labor Relations Board is the institution that hosts the disputes between workers and bosses, and it bases itself on the BC Labor Code to ruling against or in favor of workers. Employees and employers and unions can take issues to the board for grievance procedures, and only if the labor code has been violated. So the BC Labor Code is the outline of the protections unionized or unionizing workers currently have, and how all workers and unions can carry disputes in the workplace. And for unionized workers, it's through the collective agreements between the unions and the employers that protections that go beyond the labor code can be determined. And when we read the code, it's clear that workers and employers are put on an equal basis as equal competitors in disputes and have similar rights despite the differences that we talked about earlier. Which means that bosses will always have more power than us because they own the means through which our system can be reproduced. Then they own the workplace, they own the banks, the factories, and they employ us. Um, and there are huge problems in legislations that ultimately act as a leash and determine how far us as workers can legally struggle. And there are two examples that I think is important for us to bring to light. The first is that unions are not able to enter the workplace and talk to workers about unionizing, which is a huge barrier to garnering support. Also, workers who are trying to unionize themselves are also prevented from talking about the union in their workplace. And this is a problem because it's through conversations like the ones we have at our assemblies or when we go out to investigate that we're able to win workers to the side of struggle. And there isn't a better place to do that other than the workplace. What ends up happening is that labor organizers have to stand outside the property and wait until the end of shift so they can approach the workers when they are tired and just want to get the fuck out and go home and rest. So it makes these conversations a little harder, and it's just a barrier for us to win workers to the side of struggle. A second example, and a very important one, is that every collective agreement a union wins must provide that there will be no actions, being a strike, being whatever action, as long as the agreement continues to operate. So there, you know, periods that a contract or a collective agreement are uh, in effect, and within that period, unions are not allowed to do any sort of action. And the problem with that is that it limits us to a struggle only at certain times around certain issues that are most often specific to that workplace. And it discards any possibility of any political action from workers. It gives us the minimum to keep the system maintainable. It gives just that small economic breadcrumb, limited to something that bosses will accept. So if bosses accept that, it means that we're not going beyond what our system allows us to go. So how can workers practice political power? If it's not through our workers' organization, we're not practicing political power at all. Um, this example explains that the current legislation determines that practicing political power by workers is illegal. They'll say that we can do that by voting, but electing someone in a popularity contest that was built by the capitalists for the capitalists is not what practicing political power is. We've been doing that for decades, ever since we've been in this system, and we still are struggling. We still have to build the assemblies. We still have to build workers' organizations. So clearly, electoral politics is not the way forward. Um, So, similar to what we just talked about with the Labor Board and the Labor Code, we also have the Employment Standards Branch and the Employment Standards Act. The branch is similar to the Labor Board and is the court that rules based on the Employment Standards Act. If you find that your employer is violating the act, you can file a complaint at the branch. The only problem is that there are only 8 locations in BC, so you're definitely going to have a hard time, going through that process, which can take several months because it involves investigations that often leads to nothing. And when they perform the investigations, your employer is informed of who you are. So they're basically doing the favor of telling the bosses who their enemy is. And it puts the worker at risk, right? Of being harassed or of losing hours or even being fired. And if someone files for a worker as a third party, they're cut off from receiving all the information about the case. Um, Now, the Employment Standards Act applies to non-unionized workers and unionized workers unless their collective agreements covers more than the act, but includes some substantial exceptions. For example, it doesn't apply to independent contractors, and many workers can fall within this category. We know that in recent times there is a stimulus for workers to become contractors, so they lose fundamental rights won over by the labor movement. And the act at the end of the day maintains the profits of our bosses while keeping us in rough conditions. An example is that under the act we only get 5 paid sick days a year if we work 90 days in a row. And before 2022, we didn't we didn't even have that. And we still get no pay time off if we're caring for a sick family member or if we had a death in the family. Applying for EI or medical EI is an option, but it will only give you 55% of your previous income. And for low wage workers, is just simply not enough to survive on. And these are only in place so employers don't have to pay us what they owe. Um, Now, above the Employment Standards branch and the Act, we have the Employment Standards Regulations, which is the legal guideline of how the Act is regulated. It includes variations on minimum wage, making it even more exploitable. For example, agricultural workers being paid per amount picked, not per hour, allows their employer to further exploit and pay even less these workers. And the our rap team, our research, agitation, and propaganda team, conducted some investigation these past couple of weeks and found out interesting examples, real examples of workers getting screwed over by employment standards branch. It took for this worker 2 years. This worker at a warehouse. It took him 2 years to receive the rejection. It wasn't even the approval. It was only the rejection of his complaint at the branch, which was already a result of his boss stealing 30% of his wages and admitting to it. And sometimes complaints are even longer, upwards of 3 years, and they are always up to the judgment of an officer, and whatever the mood of that officer and their biases is at the day they are judging on it. Now you can appeal the branch decisions at the Employment Standards Tribunal, but that's another bureaucratic loophole that you're gonna spend more time dealing with that and more energy. The worker that we talked to told us that he felt like he needed a lawyer, but nowadays, who has the money and the energy to invest in that? And that's just more work, more money, more energy, more time that we don't have because we're fucking working 40 hours a week or more often. So it just makes things harder. And on top of being a dead end road to bureaucratic hell, individual workers fighting individual attacks through complaints to the branch simply isn't building collective worker power. The branch and tribunal not only will steal us from our energy, but funnel our anger into these individuals' disputes, these individual streams that don't connect other workers to an independent workers' organization to build collective power. So, and even if we win at the branch, we won't actually ever win a workplace with our interests in mind. We need a much bigger fight for this, a fight which starts in these assemblies, in the workers' assemblies, in the neighborhood assemblies, in our workers' organizations. Because we know that it's only the power that we exercise collectively that will get us what we want. Growing our numbers and starting our fall campaign, rather than catering to weak ass legislations, will put our enemy in the hot seat, exactly where we need them.
Hi, so I'm going to be talking about the Workers' Compensation Board, what we refer to as WCB, which operates as WorkSafe BC. WorkSafe BC is one of the 6 largest crown corporations in the province. The CEO in 2022 made almost $400,000. A worker we met recently referred to WorkSafe as bloodsuckers. He said dealing with them made him feel like they were accusing him constantly of lying. He had to take time off after a head neurological injury, pretty severe one. He said he woke up in the hospital and couldn't remember why or how. He was only able to get 6 months paid time off through WorkSafe. Then he had to go back to work. His boss was an asshole, like no sympathy, back to doing the same old thing, and just ended up switching him to evening shifts because this worker's head neurological injury made it so he really couldn't sleep. WorkSafe in itself was created as an historic compromise to benefit workers and employers. So that already tells us something, right? It's a compromise between us and our bosses. Much the same as the Employment Standards Branch complaints Miguel went over, WorkSafe complaints cannot be made anonymously. So it's particularly concerning if a complaint to WorkSafe is about harassment. This puts the worker at retaliation by the boss because the boss will be undergoing this investigation and know that it was the worker who complained. Furthermore, and similar to the Employment Standards Branch, a complaint process, work-safe complaints are on an individual basis, right? It's just case by case. We're not looking at changing the systemic nature of violence in the workplace or the working conditions. A worker could file a complaint, and even if the investigation leads to compensation, that's obviously good for the worker, but there's no oversight. So the employer, the boss, couldn't just keep on doing the same thing to either the same worker or different workers. It's also our bosses who are responsible for investigating incidents or near misses that take place in the workplace. They're supposed to submit the evidence reports, the investigation reports to WorkSafe BC. They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting our safety, and we know our bosses do not have, it's not on their mind. They're all about profit. Additionally, on its very website, WorkSafe states that it may investigate workplace incidents. No guarantee. It just may do. WorkSafe just may do this if they feel like it. There's no have to. There's no they will investigate every incident and then some. Similarly to WorkSafe BC, but with some nuances, there's the BC Human Rights Tribunal. This is a bureaucratic body that we can file a complaint to if we're discriminated against at work based on race, ability, gender, sexuality. But similarly to WorkSafe and the Employment Standards Branch and the BC Labor Relations Board, this isn't doing anything to change the conditions of work and change the system of profits being made on our backs, right? Human rights tribunal complaints are also incredibly long and bureaucratic, like 6 months to a year, and aren't going to do anything to change our working conditions. It's essentially just giving our bosses a slap on the wrist, and they can keep on profiting, and they will keep on profiting. Another exploitative piece of legislation is the Temporary Foreign Workers Act, which is designed so bosses can profit more off of particularly exploited migrant labor. The Temporary Foreign Workers Act limits migrant workers' collective power by forcing migrant workers to accept shittier pay and conditions for the hopes of PR citizenship, something which rarely happens. As you can see from this graph here, it demonstrates an example. For migrant care workers, the permanent residency that was granted to migrant workers was less than 1/5 of the targeted amount. Like, that's huge. And migrant workers outside of the Temporary Foreign Workers Act and program are also in particularly exploited positions. One of our comrades is working in a fish factory, and one of his coworkers essentially said, "We are workers who can't speak English, so we can't get sick or ask for much, or they won't need us." And that shows this legislation, which is designed so bosses can profit a ton off of migrant labor. And there are a whole bunch of other examples too of migrant workers being denied wages, good working conditions. Over 100 Guatemalan farm workers had over $130,000 stolen from them collectively in 2018. So I'm going to go into the next half of the presentation. Thank you again so much for watching. I'm going to essentially be talking about how we fight, because at the July Assembly, and hopefully outside of that too, we've been having conversations about the limitations of workplace legislation, which is designed to protect us, or is protecting us, and we've demonstrated how it's not. It is designed for profit. But what do we actually do, right? Going back to the beginning of this presentation and what it's called, how do we actually advance workers' rights and welfare, right? Like, what do we do? We also want to emphasize it's not bad. It's not bad to fight for compensation, right? We need to. It can even be a point of consciousness raising. But what do we actually do? What do we do to actually win? Well, I'm going to go through a 4-step scientific method about how we advance workers' rights and welfare and how we win. Investigate, agitate, organize, and mobilize. We start by investigating. So step 1. This means finding out the challenges of the workers who are not in this, room, or in this case, who might not be listening to the presentation, are facing. So if you've been to any East Vancouver Workers' Assembly, or if you follow us in other ways, you've probably heard us talk about RAP, research, agitation, and politicization. RAP makes investigation a reality, and we invite you to join us. Once again, I'll flag our email and Instagram. So our research, the RAP research, East Van Workers Assembly research, is done by regularly asking other workers about their working conditions. There is a wealth of knowledge within the working class. Planning campaigns, including our upcoming fall offensive, is best done when we can see how issues, real issues, are playing out in workers' lives and at their jobs. A delivery driver told us recently that he would join us, the East Vancouver Workers Assembly, but only once we reach 1 million members. So how do we build that level of worker power to get to 1 million of us? 1 million people watching right now. We are putting ideas out there which workers can relate to and talking about things that make all of us angry. We aren't going to bring in more workers, and we'll continue to be small potatoes that this delivery driver told us we are. So how do we do that? Step 2. Agitating. Agitating with workers is the next step. It allows us to grow the assembly and build our numbers, getting to that million. So growing the assembly and building our numbers are necessary and urgent tasks for our upcoming campaign in the fall, particularly. We've grown up in a rigged economic system and been taught wrong ideas, so it isn't surprising that we hear phrases like, "it is what it is," or "at least I'm not living on the streets," when we go investigate and talk to workers. In our conversations, we challenge other workers to think about our power. Enough small potatoes can crush whatever stands in its path. And we're building this force by organizing, which is step 3. This assembly right here, this virtual assembly right now, is a space for us as workers to do what we want with it. Fighting must first come from a place of unity, which is why we spent the past year building a workers' platform. Through investigation, the first step. We've gone over the past 9 platform points with assembly attendees that are posted on our website. We've been taking the time to discuss and learn from each other and really think about what it means for us to be an active assembly. Participation and engagement from every worker is our goal. So we invite you watching, your coworkers, your friends, comrades, anyone else, to join us for our fall campaign, as we will be doing step 4, mobilizing. For the assembly, it's mobilizing our numbers to support the Sheraton workers at their site of class struggle as the Solidarity Worker Action Team. However, in the fall, we'll be launching our own offensive, which will be fighting for our comrades on that picket line and other workers. If we want to win, we need workers in this room, so whoever's watching, and outside of it, to bring what they can to the fight. We truly do need all of us.
Thank you, everybody. We don't have the email on the screen, but if you get on our website, you can find it there. Shoot us any questions. If you want to come to the assembly, shoot us a message. We can give you more information and get involved. Let's build workers' power. Thank you.